Well, a lot of what we've been talking about is, of course, the anti-blackness inherent in policing. Here on, the 2nd of Pride Month, it only is suitable that we also touch a little bit on Stonewall. Not a whole lot of people know quite how this all kind of went down, but I want to touch at least on the cursory level. And I want to touch. I'm going to pull, some of this from Wikipedia as my source, but and I'm going to be kind of skimming it briefly, or covering it briefly. 2 undercover policewomen and undercover policemen entered the bar early that evening to gather visual evidence. They called for backup. Stonewall employees do not recall being tipped off the raid was to occur that night, as was the custom. So officers were intending to do some manner of raid here. And this was not for what you might think it is. And I want to read this part here. The raid did not go as planned. Standard procedure was to line up the patrons, check their identification, and have female police officers take customers dressed as women to the bathroom to verify their sex, upon which any people appearing to be physically male and dressed as women would be arrested. Those dressed as women that night refused to go with the officers. Men in line began to refuse to produce their identification. But I want to read that phrase again, because I really want to stick to it. Standard procedure was to line up the patrons, check their identification, and have female police officers take customers dressed as women to the bathroom to verify their sex. And to arrest anyone who was trans. A lot of people think that, are, kind of under the impression that the Stonewall riots, because it called a riot, was just people, starting to throw a fit. No, this was a police raid conducted undercover, wherein they decided to take a bunch of people who were doing no harm and sexually harass them and then arrest them. And that was standard procedure. Some of these quotes. My biggest fear was that I would get arrested. My second biggest fear was that my picture would be in a newspaper or on a television report in my mother's dress. Let's see. Both patrons and police recalled that a sense of discomfort spread very quickly, spurred by police who began to assault some of the lesbians by feeling some of them up inappropriately while frisking them. Yes, things got violent at Stonewall. Cops started it. And that needs to be real clear. So, yeah, they started refusing to produce their identifications. Which started leading to, escalation of force, etc. Although the police forcefully pushed or kicked some patrons out of the bar, some customers released by the police performed for the crowds by posing and saluting the police in an exaggerated fashion. The crowd's applause encouraged them further. Exactly, Shaloon. Right? But yeah, so they started trying to make arrests, and then things started getting quiet until someone shouted gay power. They started singing, and then an officer shoved in this case, won't identify Wikipedia's word, an officer shoved a transvestite, which might be accurate at the time for that individual. Don't know. I know that has largely been removed, that word's largely been dropped by the LGBT community. In this context, I'm not sure if it's accurate or not. It's just what's written in this article, or account of it. Who responded by hitting him on the head with her purse as the crowd began to boo. Pennies, then beer bottles were thrown at the wagon as rumor spread throughout the crowd that patrons still inside the bar were being beaten. Which is true. Police tried to restrain some of the crowd, knocking a few people down, which incited bystanders even more. The crowd tried to overturn the police wagon. 2 police cars and the wagon, with a few slashed tires, left immediately, with Inspector Pine urging them to return as soon as possible. The commotion attracted more people who learned what was happening. Someone in the crowd declared that the bar had been raided because they didn't pay off the cops. Which someone else had yelled, "Let's pay them off," and they started throwing coins at police, shouting pigs. Yeah. But, getting that rowdy in the face of what cops were doing there, I think is entirely justified. That part is a little funny. Yes. Let's see. Though Van Ronk was not gay, he had experience with police violence when he participated in anti-war demonstrations. As far as I was concerned, anybody who'd stand against the cops was all right with me, and that's why I stayed. Every time you turned around, the cops were pulling some outrage or another. Van Ronk was one of 13 arrested that night. Yeah, so a lot of these places, so this was when, like, just being gay was illegal, which wasn't long ago. And so some of these bars would actually pay to, not to be allowed to operate, to cater to their audience. Your parents didn't believe you that was true in their lifetimes. Jeez. Yeah, this is not old. This is not old news. This is not old news. 1970. Or 1969, I guess. Yeah. 1969. My bad. Okay, so one thing that we had from the cops is they hadn't quite formalized SWAT at this time. They were still in that process, but they did have the New York City Police Department did have the Tactical Police Force, which is their version of SWAT, and they were deployed to Stonewall. And this, of course, was where it turned particularly violent. I'll point out that at any point, you know, these cops probably could have just fled the scene. I know that looks weak or whatever, but it's an option that was on the table to them. But rather than ever consider that, they only wanted to send more cops. This, of course, you know, because of the nature of it, it gets classified as a riot. It's why I take a lot of exception to what the media calls riots and how public perception of what a riot is so tainted. Because a riot is not inherently a bad thing. A riot in the face of injustice is justice and should be supported. However, though, yeah, that's true. That's true, Homesteader. If they were getting kickbacks, they wanted to make that noise, yeah. It was founded starting riots. That's true. That is the inception of the United States, for better or worse. Now, in the face of what happened at the bar, of course, protesting continued. And those protests, because the cops were so shamed, were quick to call the continued protests riots and to deploy the tactical police force again to attack where they could. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit because a lot of the, you know, everyone kind of knows Pride. I think most people know that Pride was founded, or, you know, is a celebration or a recognition of, or at least pays homage to the Stonewall riots, as well as, you know, some of the wins that have been won for the LGBT community since then, as well as, you know, a call to further action. But I wanted to get a little bit deeper into it. You know, this is not exhaustive, and I may, over the course of the month, do more reading and get more concrete information. But just even this cursory stuff, like, it was messed up. And and the actual protests, 110% justified. Because the cops were just, I mean, they were extorting, they were committing sexual assault, they were being violent. Like, there's no justice in this, and all for what? Because some people were having a good time in a bar? Fuck off. That is not protecting and serving shit. Anyway, that's going to be a little bit of my contribution through this month, is to try and find some of these kinds of stories, and I might try and do a more thorough explanation of Stonewall in a future one, but I do want to touch on some of these stories because, I mean, like Shalhoub even touches on, a lot of people don't realize how the LGBT community has been historically and is currently criminalized. And like, that is what these bathroom bills are about, is to give cops the ability to do exactly what they did in the Stonewall Inn, is to, you know, pull people, check their ideas, and grope them. All for what? Exactly, Humster. Yeah, it isn't protecting and serving anything but them, or yeah, them. Always about control, yeah. So yeah, that's... How long have you been looking, Eppa? How bad have I botched my coverage here? I try not to sway... I try to do things as respectfully as I can, even as part of the absolute privileged class of white cis-het male. It's intimidation. It's the whole thing. Yeah. Yes. Now, since they can't criminalize all homosexuals, they're targeting who they can still get people on board with criminalizing: the trans community. Gotcha. Yeah. And yes, Shalhoub, yeah. Yeah, trying to erase their very existence and ability to exist in society. Yeah. So here's another good quote. I like this quote here. This is Michael Fader. Thanks for the follow, Danobo. Danobo. We all had a collective feeling that we'd had enough of this kind of shit. It wasn't anything tangible anybody said to anyone else. It was just kind of like everything over the years had come to a head on that one particular night in that one particular place, and it was not an organized demonstration. Everyone in the crowd felt that we were never going to go back. It was like the last straw. It was time to reclaim something that had been taken from us. All kinds of people, all different reasons, but mostly it was total outrage, anger, sorrow, everything combined, and everything just kind of ran its course. It was the police who were doing most of the destruction. Surprise. We were really trying to get back in and break free, and we felt that we had freedom at last, or freedom to at least show that we demanded freedom. We weren't going to be walking meekly in the night and letting them shove us around. It's like standing your ground for the first time and in a really strong way, and that's what caught the police by surprise. There was something in the air. Freedom, a long time overdue, and we're going to fight for it. It took different forms, but the bottom line was we weren't going to go away, and we didn't. Really good quote. And that's the thing. With any sort of injustice, like, they can push, and they can push, and they can push, and they can push. At some point, enough people have had enough. And they get pushed back. It doesn't have to be this way, though. Cops... If the Institute of Policing were fundamentally changed, if it were abolished and rebuilt the correct way, like with community health in mind, it wouldn't have this contentious relationship with the community it was policing. It wouldn't constantly be at odds with every group of people. I don't know. It requires building up enough support for that. Some people can be swayed through conversation. Some people will never be swayed. Some will when they first get their first whiff of tear gas. Being on the wrong end of a police line has a way of radicalizing folks real fast, and cops are putting more and more people on the opposite side of their police line, so... Yeah, exactly. Chipping away at it will help, as well as parallel networks taking over for what needs are not being met. Yep. So, to that end, feel like I want to drop this link, of course. You know, this isn't per se a total mutual aid network, but it is a very important cause. Trans Lifeline is an important one, and this Transgender Law Center. Two very good causes to support through donation, and of course, you know, ACLU I always advocate for. In the Discord, I continue to post a few different mutual aid networks and hubs and causes. mutualaidhub.org in particular is an interesting one, because it seems to just be a collection of mutual aid organizations across the country, many of them local, that you could get involved with, or if you are trying to operate one or get one, the awareness of one out there, it's a good resource to publicize that.